Indiana's really well coached. Like, they took how we were guarding stuff last game, and they immediately made adjustments and punt.
Stephanie White just made one of the most baffling, most damaging, most inexcusable halftime decisions in recent WNBA memory, and Caitlyn Clark paid the price for it. 15 points, 7 assists, an 80% shooting performance from the Indiana Fever in the first quarter alone. Caitlyn Clark was not just playing well in Atlanta. She was dismantling the Dream's entire defensive structure, piece by piece, with the kind of surgical precision that you only see from elite playmakers operating at the absolute peak of their game. And then the second half started, and Stephanie White walked back into that locker room, looked at what was working, looked at the player who was making it work, and decided, deliberately, consciously, without hesitation, to pull the plug on all of it. Welcome back. This is Rim Run, and today we are tearing apart the single most self-destructive coaching decision the Indiana Fever have made this season, exposing the pattern behind it, and asking the question that nobody in the mainstream conversation wants to answer. How long does Caitlyn Clark have to carry this franchise before Stephanie White stops getting in her way?
Ups, and it was really in the second half where our communication got a lot better, and our switching was a lot better, and our help side was in the right.
Let me set the stakes for you right now, because I want every single person watching this video to understand exactly what we are dealing with before we go any further. The Indiana Fever traveled to Atlanta for a game they were absolutely built to win. Caitlyn Clark came out in the first half and delivered what can only be described as a masterclass. 15 points, 7 assists. The Fever were shooting at an historically blistering rate, 80% from the field in the first quarter. 80%. That is not a hot streak. That is a team executing a specific offensive system at an elite level, with a specific player at the center of it, making reads that the Atlanta Dream simply could not answer. And here is the brutal, undeniable reality that makes this loss so soul-crushing to process. The Fever did not lose this game because Caitlyn Clark stopped being great. The Fever lost this game because Stephanie White looked at the most effective offensive performance her team had produced all season and decided to abandon it. She walked into that halftime locker room with a 17-point swing advantage in first-half execution, and she came out of it running offense through Kelsey Mitchell instead of Caitlyn Clark. She dismantled her own machine. She unplugged her own engine. She saw the fire and poured water on it herself. And now the Indiana Fever have dropped consecutive losses, back-to-back, while the Atlanta Dream put all 5 starters in double digits. While Coach Smesko stood at the post-game podium and explained, calmly and methodically, exactly how his team survived the Fever's first-half explosion and then dismantled them in the second. While all of that was happening on the Dream's side, adjustment, execution, maturity, Stephanie White was on the other bench making decisions that defy every principle of competitive basketball strategy. This is not a one-game story. This is a pattern. And today we are documenting it, frame by frame, word by word, until there is absolutely nothing left to debate.
You can't get comfortable. Like, our offense is really good right now because we're executing it with a certain pace and precision. As soon as it doesn't have either of those, then we're no longer clicking.
Let me walk you through what actually happened in this game, because the numbers tell a story that Stephanie White's post-game comments will never fully capture, and you deserve to have the complete picture. Caitlyn Clark opened this game in Atlanta with the kind of first half that makes basketball fans stop what they are doing and just watch. 15 points, 7 assists, and the team around her was responding. The entire Fever offense was clicking. They were getting good looks. They were converting. They were moving the ball, finding the open player, attacking the paint, and forcing the Dream's defense into scramble mode on every single possession. That 80% field goal rate in the first quarter was not an accident. It was the direct result of running the offense through Caitlyn Clark and letting her make decisions. Now I want you to think about that for a second. Really sit with it. 80% from the field. In the first quarter, in a road game, against a team that had been playing well enough to score over 100 points in multiple consecutive games. The Fever were not just competing, they were dominating. And the person making it happen was the rookie that half the league's old guard spent the entire offseason trying to diminish. Coach Smesko confirmed it from the other sideline. He told the media after the game that Indiana played at an elite level in that first half. He did not hedge, he did not qualify it. He said it plainly, Indiana played offense at just an elite level in the first half. He also confirmed that his team was simply hanging around in the first half, surviving, staying close enough to feel like they were still in a good spot at halftime. The Dream's own head coach admitted they were on the ropes. He admitted they needed the second half to get their defense organized. He admitted that the Fever had punished them and forced a full halftime reevaluation. So let me ask you something. If the opposing head coach is standing at a podium after his team wins and he is telling the media that Indiana played at an elite level and that his team was just hanging around, trying to survive the first half, what does that tell you about the decision Stephanie White made to abandon the very system that was producing that elite-level play? It tells you everything. It tells you that the problem was not the game plan, it was not the players, it was not Caitlyn Clark. The problem was the person sitting in the head coach's chair making decisions in the second half that directly contradicted everything the first half had proven. Now here is where it gets absolutely damning, and I want you to hear this directly from Coach Smesko. Because when a winning coach tells you in his own words exactly what happened at halftime, that is not commentary, that is a receipt. Don't take my word for it. Here is what Smesko said to the media about how the Dream survived that first half and what changed.
Indiana's really well coached. Like, they took how we were guarding stuff last game and they immediately made adjustments and punished.
He said it with cameras rolling. Indiana is really well coached. They took how we were guarding stuff last game and immediately made adjustments and punished it. Let me say that back to you so you do not miss what just happened. Coach Smesko, the winning coach, just confirmed on record that the Indiana Fever made halftime adjustments that punished the Dream's defensive scheme. The Fever came in with a prepared, intelligent game plan. The Fever had answers, and then Stephanie White threw those answers in the trash in the second half and went back to running offense through Kelsey Mitchell instead of the player who had just put up 15 and 7 in 20 minutes. This is not speculation. This is not a hot take. This is the sequence of events as confirmed by the opposing head coach, on camera at the post-game press conference. The Fever had the right system. They had the right player running it, and Stephanie White abandoned both.
And it was really in the second half where our communication got a lot better and our switching was a lot better and our help side was in the right.
Now I need you to understand why this matters beyond just one game, because the pattern here is what makes this truly catastrophic for the Indiana Fever's long-term trajectory. Pass 1, the tactical failure. What Stephanie White did at halftime of this game was not a subtle adjustment. It was not a nuanced tactical shift designed to counter the Dream's second-half defensive changes. It was a wholesale abandonment of the offensive system that had produced an 80% field goal rate in the first quarter. She went from running offense through Caitlyn Clark, the player with 15 points and 7 assists, to running it through Kelsey Mitchell. And the result was exactly what you would expect when you pull the engine out of a car that is running perfectly. The car stops moving forward. The Fever could not get over the hump. They dropped the game. They dropped to back-to-back consecutive losses. And the Atlanta Dream, a team that was, by their own coach's admission, just hanging around and surviving in the first half, walked away with the win. Let me be entirely clear about what this means tactically. When a team is shooting 80% and your star player has 15 points and 7 assists in the first half, the correct halftime adjustment is to find ways to make it harder for the defense to stop what you are already doing. You do not stop doing it. You do not pivot to a different player. You do not abandon the read and react system that is generating wide-open looks and easy buckets. You protect it. You reinforce it. You make the defense solve a problem they have already demonstrated they cannot solve. Stephanie White did the opposite. She handed the Dream a solution they did not earn. Pass 2. The pattern of behavior. This is not the first time this kind of decision has defined a Fever loss. The conversation around Stephanie White and her relationship with the Caitlyn Clark-centered offensive system has been building all season. The offense shifts back and forth, sometimes running through Clark, sometimes reverting to older patterns that predate her arrival. And every single time the Fever revert, the results are the same. The team stalls. The scoring dries up. The opponent's defense, which had been scrambling to contain Clark's playmaking, suddenly has a much simpler assignment. And the Fever lose games they should not be losing. The Atlanta Dream, by contrast, had all 5 starters in double digits in this game, every single one. That is not a coincidence. That is what happens when a head coach builds a system, commits to it, and refuses to abandon it when it gets hard. Coach Smesko did not walk into that halftime locker room down and decide to start running plays through a different player. He made defensive adjustments, communication, switching, help side positioning, and he trusted his offensive system to keep producing. It did. 113 points, a franchise record. And the Fever, who had been matching them shot for shot in the first half, fell apart in the second because their head coach could not commit to the system that was working. Pass 3. The enabler complicity. The conversation about Stephanie White's decision-making has been happening at the margins of the WNBA media landscape for weeks now, but the mainstream coverage keeps burying it. The press releases focus on the Dream's offensive explosion. The highlight reels show Coach Smesko's post-game celebration. Nobody in the traditional media wants to have the direct, uncomfortable conversation about what Stephanie White is doing to this roster. Specifically, what she is doing to Caitlyn Clark's ability to operate at the level she is clearly capable of operating at. Because here is what the establishment does not want you to look at. When Caitlyn Clark is running the offense, the Fever are a different team. They are not just better, they are transformatively better. 80% from the field in the first quarter is not a normal basketball number. That is a number you see when a team is executing at an elite level with an elite playmaker at the controls. And when Stephanie White takes those controls away from Clark and hands them to someone else, the team reverts to being ordinary. Not bad necessarily, but ordinary. And ordinary does not beat a team that is playing with the kind of pace and precision that Coach Smesko described when he talked about the Dream's offensive resurgence. Pass 4. The cost to Caitlyn Clark. And this is the part that I want every single person watching this video to really sit with, because it is the most brutal dimension of this entire story. Caitlyn Clark came to Atlanta and gave her team everything she had. 15 points, 7 assists, an 80% field goal rate from the team around her in the first quarter. She did her job. She did it at an elite level. She made the reads, she found the open players, she pushed the pace, she created the advantages that the Fever needed to win this game. And then she watched, from the bench, from the court, wherever she was standing, as the head coach of her own team dismantled the system that was making all of it possible. That is the cost, not just the loss, not just the consecutive losses. The cost is that Caitlyn Clark is being forced to watch her own best performances get neutralized. Not by the opposing defense, not by her own limitations, but by the coaching decisions of the person who is supposed to be putting her in the best possible position to succeed. That is a soul-crushing reality for a player of her caliber, and it is an unacceptable one. Now here is the second receipt, and this one comes directly from Coach Smesko, talking about what his team was able to do once the Fever's offense shifted away from the Clark-centered system in the second half. I want you to hear exactly how he described the Dream's defensive recovery, because what he says tells you everything about what Stephanie White's halftime decision actually accomplished.
You can't get comfortable. Like, our offense is really good right now because we're executing it with a certain pace and precision. As soon as it doesn't have either of those, then we're no longer clicking.
There it is. In the second half, their communication got a lot better. Their switching was a lot better. Their help side was in the right spot. Coach Smesko is describing, in precise tactical language, the exact adjustments that turned the game around for Atlanta, and every single one of those adjustments was made easier, dramatically easier, by the fact that Stephanie White had removed the one player whose decision-making was exposing every miscommunication and defensive breakdown the Dream had. When Caitlyn Clark is running the offense, the defense has to be perfect. Every switch has to be right. Every help side rotation has to be on time. Because if it is not, Clark will find the crack and exploit it. The moment Stephanie White took Clark out of that role, she gave the Dream's defense permission to be imperfect. And they took it. That is not a coincidence. That is cause and effect. Stephanie White's halftime decision did not just fail to help the Fever. It actively helped the Atlanta Dream. It made Coach Smesko's second-half adjustments easier to execute. It removed the variable that his defense could not contain. And it handed Atlanta a win that their own head coach admitted they were not earning in the first half. Now let me render the verdict on this situation, because the evidence is no longer ambiguous and the time for hedging is over. Stephanie White is the problem. Not the only problem the Fever face, but the primary, undeniable, glaring problem that is preventing this team from becoming what it is clearly capable of becoming. And I want to be precise about why, because this is not about personality or politics or the noise that surrounds this franchise. This is about basketball decisions. Specifically, it is about the decision to abandon a system that was producing historic first-half numbers in favor of a system that the data has repeatedly shown is not sufficient to win games at this level. Here is my first prediction. The Fever are going to continue to lose games in exactly this pattern. Dominant first halves when Clark is running the offense, collapsed second halves when White reverts to the Mitchell-centered system, until one of two things happens. Either Stephanie White commits, fully and without reservation, to building the entire offensive identity of this team around Caitlyn Clark's playmaking, or the Fever front office makes the decision that the fan base is already arriving at on its own. Here is my second prediction. Coach Smesko and the Atlanta Dream are going to keep winning games like this one, not because they are the most talented team in the league, but because they have a head coach who commits to a system, makes intelligent adjustments within that system, and does not abandon what is working when the going gets hard. Smesko talked after this game about pace and precision. He talked about playing to each other's strengths. He talked about the fact that the offense is really good right now because they are executing it with a certain pace and precision. And the moment that disappears, they are no longer clicking. That is the language of a coach who understands what his team is and refuses to let it become something else. Stephanie White does not appear to have that same clarity about what the Indiana Fever are. Here is my third prediction. The conversation about Stephanie White's job security is going to intensify with every consecutive loss. It is already happening at the margins. It is already being whispered in the spaces where the traditional media refuses to go. And the moment the Fever drop a third consecutive game, or a fourth, with Caitlyn Clark putting up first-half numbers that any other franchise in this league would build an entire offensive philosophy around, that conversation is going to move from the margins to the center, and it is going to be impossible to ignore. Now I want to show you the third and most revealing piece of evidence from this post-game press conference. Because Coach Smesko said something that, when you apply it to what Stephanie White did in the second half, becomes one of the most damning indictments of her decision-making that you will find anywhere in this story. Here is what he said about what it takes to keep an offense clicking at the level the Dream have been playing at. Watch this. I want you to hear it in his own words. Our offense is really good right now because we are executing it with a certain pace and precision. And as soon as it does not have either of those, we are no longer clicking. He said that. The winning coach said that. And I want you to apply those exact words to what Stephanie White did to the Indiana Fever at halftime of this game. She removed the pace, she removed the precision, she took the player who was generating both, Caitlyn Clark, 15 points, 7 assists, 80% team shooting in the first quarter, and she shifted the offense to a system that, by the evidence of this game and the games before it, does not produce either of those things at the same level. And the Fever stopped clicking, immediately, completely, and they lost. There is no spin to put on that. There is no alternative interpretation. Coach Smesko just handed you the exact diagnostic language you need to understand what Stephanie White did wrong, and he handed it to you while standing at the winner's podium. Pace, precision. The moment you lose either one, you are no longer clicking. Stephanie White lost both at halftime, deliberately, consciously, and the Indiana Fever paid the price. Let me tell you what Caitlyn Clark is doing right now, in the present tense, regardless of what any head coach decides to do with the system around her. She is competing, she is making reads, she is finding open players, she is generating the kind of first-half performances that make opposing head coaches stand at podiums and admit their team was just hanging around trying to survive. She is doing everything that a franchise player is supposed to do. She is delivering the pace, she is delivering the precision, she is delivering the exact offensive environment that Coach Smesko just told you is the difference between clicking and not clicking. And she is doing it while watching her own head coach dismantle that environment every time it starts to produce results. That is the story. That is the brutal, undeniable mathematical reality of what is happening to the Indiana Fever right now. The talent is there, the system is there, when it is allowed to breathe. The player running it is there every single night, giving everything she has. The problem is the decision-making at the top. The problem is the halftime pivot. The problem is the reversion to a system that the evidence has repeatedly shown cannot get the Fever over the hump. The problem is Stephanie White, and the Fever's front office needs to start asking the question that the fan base is already asking, loudly and without apology. How many more first halves does Caitlyn Clark have to dominate before the second half is allowed to match it? Before I close this out, I want to make sure we acknowledge what the Atlanta Dream did right in this game, because it is directly relevant to the larger argument. Coach Smesko's team scored 113 points, the most in franchise history. All 5 starters were in double digits. They had 12 offensive possessions to the Fever's 4 in terms of extra opportunities. They played with pace, they played with precision, and when the Fever came in with adjustments that initially punished them, Smesko's team regrouped at halftime, made changes, and executed those changes with the kind of discipline that wins games. That is the standard. That is what competent head coaching looks like in the WNBA in 2024. And it is the standard against which Stephanie White's halftime decision in this game must be measured. Not against some abstract ideal of what good coaching looks like, against the concrete, visible, documented example of what the opposing head coach did in the same game, on the same night, with the same stakes. The Dream were not rattled. They understood what they needed to do and they went out and executed it. The Fever had a 17-point lead in first-half execution and then proceeded to hand it back. That gap between the team that committed to its system and the team that abandoned its best players' strengths at halftime is Stephanie White's responsibility. Fully, completely, without qualification. Here is your forced choice for today, and I want you to answer it in the comments right now because this is the conversation that actually matters. Do you believe Stephanie White can fix this? That she can commit, fully and without reservation, to building the Fever's offensive identity around Caitlyn Clark and stop reverting to the old system when the pressure is on? Or do you believe the Indiana Fever front office needs to make a change before this team wastes another season of what Caitlyn Clark is clearly capable of producing? One or two, that is it. Drop it in the comments, because the answer to that question is going to define what this franchise looks like for the next several years. And the time to start having it honestly is right now. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a breakdown when the story is this important. This is Rim Run, and we will be right back here the moment the next receipt drops.